You're listening to The Business of Glamping and Unique Holiday Rentals, episode 11. This is where we love to talk about tips, tricks and inspirations for anyone hosting guests in unique structures. And today we are dealing with the question that I get asked most often. How do I get planning permission for my glamping business? Today, with my special guest, we're going to tackle this subject head on. So let's get started. Glamping and unique holiday rentals are surging in popularity with the growing desire of customers to book holidays that deliver an experience. They are also the new business of choice for those wanting to improve their work-life balance. So how do you build a strong business like this that gives you the life you need and a great investment? I'm Sarah Riley and I want to share what I've discovered after being immersed in this industry for over 20 years to inspire you to find out more about what's going on. Welcome, this is The Business of Glamping and Unique Holiday Rentals. Hello and welcome to the show. It's fantastic to have you join me here today with a special guest who's going to talk to us about planning. Yes, I know that this is a subject that many of you are aware of, whether it's for this particular project, glamping, or unique holiday rentals, or it's something that you've had to tackle when dealing with your own property, your own house, or the use of a building, a business building, or change of use, or anything else that you may have come across in your life. Now, I've been involved in glamping for many years, and I always recommend to those who are wanting to start in this line of work to speak to a planning expert about the land and buildings that they want to have as part of their business. But planning guidance and attitudes vary from place to place, and it can be quite subjective, as we talk about in this interview. The guidance is open to interpretation, and they are often influenced by local issues. Now, I always recommend finding someone with specific experience of obtaining glamping planning consents or similar, as they will understand the issues and the real heart of this type of business, and they'll know what to highlight and talk about when applying for the permissions that you need. I am in the fortunate position of working with many planning experts in this industry, and one such expert is Roger Brisley from Timber and Tent. So I took the opportunity to ask him for his tips on how to get planning permission for a glamping business and what he recommends in certain situations and certain scenarios. So Roger is someone who has been at the drawing boards in architects and engineering offices for many years, and he has spent a great deal of time at Hook Park and Parnham Trust in Dorset in the UK, and he has now been involved in his own business which designs and builds eco-friendly tents and canopies. But while building his tent styles, he also keeps his finger on the pulse of architecture and planning matters, and he's now been involved in the planning and design of some great structures, from big canopies at the Eden Project to small quirky sheds for clients around the UK and internationally. So Roger was very kind to give me some of his time so that we could all understand the complexities of planning and gaining planning permission in this industry. So without further ado, let's hop on over to that interview. Well, hi Roger, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Sarah.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I have got an ulterior motive for getting you on the show, and that is because I get so many questions from people that I'm speaking to daily about planning and about getting permissions, and this is an area that you really specialize in, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But firstly, so that the listeners know who you are, can you tell me a little bit about you and what you do and your kind of experiences in the glamping world?
Okay, well, I suppose I've got a background in architecture and engineering. And years ago, I went to a place called Hook Park College, part of the Parnham Trust down here in Dorset. And I was studying about timber, but that indirectly got me involved in tensile fabric structures or tents, which I've been working on for about 20 years now or so. And I've always kept my hand in architecture, and of course, tents and architecture, well, that kind of equals glamping, really. So it was a natural progression to get into planning for glamp sites and such like. So that's pretty much the size of it, I guess. So yeah.
And you used to work in Hook Park, and Hook Park, I've had a bit of experience of some of the projects that have been developed for that particular park. That's where they do the architectural, well, when new architects who are training, they can design and construct structures.
Yeah,
Am I right?
yeah. When I was there, it was run by John Makepeace, the rather famous furniture designer. It's since been passed on to the Architectural Association, probably certainly the UK's, possibly even internationally regarded architectural school. And there's some just fabulous buildings down there. The main building was designed by a guy called Frey Otto, who again worked with Buckminster Fuller, and it's all about bubble structures and stuff like that. But particularly with working with timber as well, which is very dear to my heart. And it was a fabulous year in the woods, really. I studied there, really, rather than worked there. It's opened a lot of doors for me, to be over the years, and gave me a real good grounding in additional to architecture and in fine design. And it's well worth a visit for anybody, particularly in the springtime with the bluebells underneath all fabulous beech trees there. It's just the most glorious sight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I helped Jane Field Lewis project manage her book, The Anatomy of Tree Houses, and some of the projects in that particular book were from Hook Park, and some of them have actually been removed since, so they don't exist there anymore. But I had the pleasure of being able to see the images of those structures being built and when they were in situ, and it really is the most amazing place where people are able to be so creative. It must have been a real pleasure for you to work there.
Yeah, it was fantastic. We got to meet some brilliant people. People like Clifton Monteith, a rather obscure designer from the Adirondacks, who specialises in willow furniture. But I mean, it was just fantastic that the European Forestry Commissioner came over and chatted to us, and it was just fabulously enlightening. And then indeed John Makepeace as well, who's one of the UK's, well, probably the UK's leading furniture designer. It just very, very inspirational. And all the other guys there, there were many of us there on the course. I think it was just about 25 of us. And I think we've all gone off and taken stuff from there and gone on to do good things, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone listening, go and check out Hook Park, and I'll leave the link to that in the show notes, which will be on inspiredcamping.com/011, which is the episode number. One of the things that people speak to me about all the time is around planning, and they all often have these issues with planning and they struggle and they don't really understand the process. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But let's talk a little bit first about your experience with planning. Where's that come from?
Okay, well, when I left school, I ended up at a drawing office in an engineer's office, and then subsequently in architects' offices, and that was over 45 years ago. And each project I've ever worked on has always involved some kind of planning process, and the planners vary wildly from area to area and individual planner to individual planner. And I've learned over the years it's almost an art form. Like it is a box ticking exercise here and there, but it's always useful to have the planner on your side, so one is always there one's friend rather than one's enemy.
That's one of the things that actually I remember of you most strongly when we first met, which was around the fact that you said the planners are our friends, they're not our enemies. And often when I'm speaking to people about their scenario and what they're trying to achieve with their business, they maybe don't have quite that same feeling. They don't have quite that same resonance about the situation that they're in, and they can struggle a bit, and they can struggle to have that relationship that they need to have with the planner. So I think that's really helpful that someone like you can come along and be that person in the middle to help to
Sure.
generate that good relationship between yourself and the person who's trying to get the planning and the planning authority.
You're very right there that the planning consultant is very much the person in the middle and the interpreter, really, of the client's desires and requirements, and the planner's allowable. They have rules that they've got to stick by, and some of it is obviously opinion and things, but they do have pretty strict rules as well with the national planning policy framework, and they struggle to bend the rules themselves. And if you get the planner, if a planner is approached in the wrong way and they're not on your side, then it's just kind of a no-brainer, really. I mean, they're not going to help you out. So it's better to be to assume that they're your friend and they're to help you, and they generally are. And I find that piggy in the middle thing is the big planning consultant job, really. Getting people's the clients' expectations, managing the client's expectations to the realistic planning permissions that will be granted. There is a disparity there generally, but not necessarily always, of course.
So we do have listeners all over the world, but today we're talking specifically about planning in the UK. And in the USA, for example, they have zoning and they have different zones, and they have different authorities that they have to approach to be able to talk about the zoning and how their permission might be achieved. But in the UK, we have a very different system. And so what are the key factors that are considered when assessing a piece of land and buildings, and whether they have potentials or a potential for a glamping site or a unique structure or a unique holiday rental? What are those key factors?
The first thing I would say, what is the current use of the land? Because inevitably, unless you're buying a holiday park and putting it on a holiday park, the current use of the land will not allow for a glamping or camping business. So that would involve a change of use of planning permission on that land. And dependent on the current use of that land will be easier or more difficult to get. I can explore that further if you'd like me to now.
Yes, that'd be great. It's certainly in your experience, if you've got certain, if there are certain types of land that have a better success rate for achieving planning consent, then definitely if someone's in that process now of looking for land and buildings, to know what they might have their most success with is definitely going to be something that would be useful.
Okay, so the first one would be land which is currently designated as holiday park. So existing caravan sites, holiday parks, and visitor centres. They pretty much got permission in place already, and minor amendments will allow planning permissions to go through with great ease on that. Then the second one would probably be farmland, possibly small holding land, but farmland easiest most of all. The national planning policy framework allows for farm diversification, and I get asked often where people want to set up a glamping business, and they might want to team up with a farmer. They might want to rent some land from a farmer to do it. And I would normally advise that it's the farmer that puts in the planning application for that, because the framework allows for that farmer to diversify his business. Now, it's between the operator and the farmer to work out the financial implications of all that. And but if the farmer applies, it will be easier to get permission. There's no doubt about that. Then I guess the third one would be the smallholding guys who, again, it has the potential for diversification on that. And again, the planners aren't daft. People have to make a living and things. So small holdings can be very useful. Then we start getting onto more difficult properties, so bare field sites. They are, particularly in the green belt, which inevitably they are, they can be, it may be possible to get planning on those. It will generally take a very long time, and you will probably need to prove a need for the business to be there, and prove that it's a viable business. So they might give you a license to operate it for 3 years, or you might try the 28-day legislation to go out there and use the thing for 28 days a year and prove the viability and the need for it, and that would help in any ultimate planning application. Woodland is much the same, possibly more difficult, although you do see huge developments like over at Longleat, where are they building something like 200 or 400 glamping units over there, Sarah?
Yeah, I know they're doing a huge amount of work.
Yeah, and actually Longleat's quite a good example, in that I have a client who I met at the glamping show a couple of years ago, who he has a site within easy visit of Longleat, and because it's such a big visitor centre, there's a proven need in the area for holiday accommodation, and he has quite a number of bell tents, and I'm assured that they're busy a lot of the year and sold out quite a lot of the year. So that's a specific need in that specific area. So you might want to choose an area like that where you work out there is a specific need. So that was Woodland. What else is there? Brownfield sites, they're good for redevelopment. Can be useful on the edge of small towns, for example, small villages. Again, you have to be careful about where the land is located. So you don't want to be in a national park like in Dartmoor, in an area of outstanding natural beauty. Listed building situations can be tricky. That's not to say that at any of these places it's impossible to get planning. It just makes it more difficult.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, for those who are just exploring this at the moment, where would people get the information from about how that a piece of land is designated, even if they don't own the land, or they're just, curious maybe about something they've seen that's come up for sale? How would they find out more information about that?
Well, there are two places to look, I would suggest. There's the National Planning Policy Framework, which is easy enough Googled and should be available through the planning portal, I think. And then there's the local plan, which is been set up by local authorities. It's been worked out by a local authority, and they will have designated areas around an area, and they're generally parish or town council plans, and they will mention holiday accommodations and things, and whether you need more holiday accommodation, or maybe they feel they've got enough there. I live near Lyme Regis, as it happens, and there's a huge amount of holiday accommodation down here, and they're still allowing more accommodation down here, which gets busy all year round. So, I guess if there's still a need, then they're more inclined to pass permission. So the national policy, NPPF, and the local plans, those are the ones to look at, I would recommend.
And for those times where things kind of rear their heads that are unexpected, how might someone deal with that? So, for example, recently I was made aware of a site that was trying to get agreement for something on a piece of land that had colonies of slow worms, and slow worms in the UK are not quite a snake, not quite a worm, they're kind of in between, and they're protected. Certain slow worms are protected, and so this gave them a real headache as to whether they could get permission or not. It's still not dealt with now. But for those finding out things like that, is there anywhere that someone can go to find out if they are going to come across an issue like that on their land that they're planning to seek permission for?
Okay, well, English Nature do have lists of plans and things. We should probably say, though, at this point, that any application will need to be accompanied by a provisional environmental assessment, which is pretty much going to have to be undertaken by another specialist. They vary in price depending on the site, etc., from, I don't know, say £300 to probably about £500, as I say, dependent on the site. I've had one done very recently on a barn. It's actually meant that because the barn is open, there's potential for bats to be there, and because there's potential for bats to be there, we now have to wait until May when the bats emerge to do an emergence survey. So we can't submit until that survey has been done. They won't even validate the planning application. That's quite important. If there's buildings involved, you will need a structural engineer's report as well if you're going to do conversions. But the provisional environmental assessment is a good one to start, and you will find ecologists locally, pretty much wherever you are in the country, who will give you a good quote. I could probably offer you a sample survey to post on your website if you'd like, Sarah.
Yes, that would be great. We can certainly include that in the show notes for anyone who's interested in finding out more. And also the links that you've told me now of all the different organisations and authorities, I can include those too in the show notes for anyone who wants to explore further. But maybe it will be helpful if we go through a few scenarios. So if we talk about a few scenarios that may or may not occur. So say, for example, someone was thinking of setting up a group of, not a big group of tent structures, but a smallish group of tent structures, maybe between 3 and 5 largish structures. If they had a house already with a little bit of additional land, how would that be? What would they first need to look into? Would it be permitted development, which allows for something to happen in the garden of a house? How would that work?
I don't think, no, because it would be a change of use on that land. You would need a full planning application. And a full planning application, as I mentioned previously, would need to be accompanied by the provisional environmental assessment, certainly if it's just the land of its buildings with a structural engineer's report, and all the forms and drawings, and the full planning application then needs to show drainage and water services. And a very big one as well that people should think about is access. If a site has poor access onto a fast road, it can stop an application dead in its tracks. Highways have a big say-so with planners, especially if you're going to be increasing traffic to a site. So a small building would normally have, say, the owners coming back and forth a couple of times a day, and the postman. You're putting 5 glamping units in there. It could have, increase the amount of traffic, maybe certainly 5-fold or maybe more a day. And the highways will want to know about that and the impact that has. There are obviously viewing distance, recommended viewing distances for access off main roads and things. So ideally, you wouldn't be approaching it from a 60-mile-an-hour road. You'd be doing it from a 30-mile-an-hour road. So contact highways. But again, this is really a planning consultant's job. But highways might come out to see you. Likewise, planners will come out to see you on a pre-planning application. I'm a little bit sceptical critical of them myself. Pre-planning applications, it tends to give the planners an excuse to say no in the first place.
You're not the first person I've heard that from, I would have to say.
No, well, certainly they've said no to ones I've put in previously, and then we've subsequently gone and got the permissions. And it can be about a change of personnel in the planning department even. That has certainly happened as well, where one person will support a project and another planning officer won't. And that's quite common.
Because it's often how people interpret the actual planning legislation, isn't it? And how an authority and the staff within it may interpret the legislation.
Yeah, sure. I think it's possibly even more visceral than that, actually. I remember planning application on my own house some years ago, but I put in a planning application to extend our tiny 2-bed cottage down here in Dorset, and I put in some flat turf-roofed oak-framed buildings to extend it, and the first planning officer just said, "Nope, don't like them, that's that," and we were so disappointed, we just walked away from it for a few years, but then resurrected it a few years later, and the next guy that came along said, "Oh, I really like these, and they're fantastic." So it's down to personal opinion.
Wow, that's quite crazy, isn't it? So persevere, I suppose, is the thing here.
And justify your designs. So justify the use and the design is very big as well. Yeah.
Yes. And so if, say, for example, it wasn't quite the 5 tenths, but it was maybe a lot less. So let's say someone just wants to set up one structure to bring in a bit of extra money alongside their existing work or job that they do. So it's more of a lifestyle thing rather than a full-blown business. And they have a house with a little bit of land that they want to put something on, just maybe one smallish structure, so not even a safari tent, but say a dome, but small dome, or a bell tent, or but something with a base and something with some toilet facilities that might be a composting toilet or something along those lines. So something that's not very impactful. Is that something that would come under permitted development, or is that something that
I don't believe so, no, because again, you're changing the use, you're charging money for it. If it would be permitted development if it was for annex to the main house, so for household members only, then it may be allowed under permitted development rules. That does vary authority to authority. Sometimes, though, if you're converting an outbuilding, I've got a case on the go at the moment where the household want to convert a little dairy building on the edge of their plot for their son to live in. And interestingly, the local authority don't like it, and they've advised us quietly to just apply for it as a holiday let, and then any incidental use by the family, it's going to be okay, as it were. But be aware their rates, their council tax might be altered by that. So strictly speaking, if you want a change of use, that is generally not permitted development.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. And also, if people are wanting to start charging money for people to stay there, then that shoves that into a different category as well, because it's no longer just a private personal use. It's more a business and earning money.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So there have been people who have said to me in the past, and quite regularly, in fact, I'm always surprised how many people mention this, that because they aren't putting a base down, say, for example, they're just putting some tents on to their land, that they don't need planning permission because they're not putting a structure down. The structures that they're actually putting in place are just canvas, and therefore they don't need planning, and they've gone ahead and done it. What would you say to that? So how is that?
If they're running a business, they need planning.
However, there is the 28-day license. And what does that do exactly? Is that just allow people to operate for 28 days without planning?
Yeah, 28 days permission thing. And you don't need to join Freedom Camping or Cool Camping or Caravan Club or Green Camping or any of those guys for that. You can just get on and do it. And it is a good way of trying it out. So, you might want to try a couple of bell tents in your back garden, and you don't need permission to I think it's up to 3 units, actually. You do not need permission to try that out for 28 days a year. And in fact, recurring, you can do that every year. You just don't need permission. But it may prove to you that, oh, this is a viable business. Well, okay, let's try and go and get planning permission before we then go and get a camping license, which is an addition to the planning permission, but you would still need planning permission if you want to do it permanently.
And if you wanted to do it for more than the 28 days, because let's face it,
yeah,
you can't earn that much money from 28 days on 3 units.
No, not really. No, that's right. And the other thing that I want to mention here about the cool camping, caravan club, green camping clubs, all these sites where their rules only really, their membership, they come out and survey your land and your property and things, and they are able to bypass the planning rules and things only in as much as that they will assess your land as a planner does, and you will always be beholden to them to call camping and such, like they take a cut of your fees, as it were. Whereas if you get planning permission, which is in effect the same thing, it will cost you more, probably. You don't need to use those guys. So if your land is not going to comply with the planners, they can't really give you a license.
Oh, that's interesting. So probably, though, you're suggesting here that if somebody wants to go for the 28-day license, then to go ahead and do it themselves without having to go through a third party.
You don't need to do anything. You just get on and do it. That's right. But be aware that engineering works, i.e. building a road, drainage works, building a deck, that kind of stuff, that can be subject to planning permission requirement.
Right. And to also, as you were saying, to have a firm eye on your long-term view as to whether, what are you hoping to do ultimately at the end of this? Are you wanting to expand it? Are you wanting to get, more planning permission to allow for a longer time, that kind of thing?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And
planning permission is permanent, and I can get a lot of clients saying, oh, we need it for so-and-so within the family and things, and, we want to double the size of our house or something. And, of course, it's all very valid for the client wanting specific reasons, and often, heart-rending reasons if they want to expand their house or something. But as far as the planner is concerned, the client's circumstances are immaterial, because it's the property and the use that they're looking at, because the planning permission is forever. And the client can turn around and sell their property straight away as soon as they've got permission.
So if somebody has if the house on that land is grade 2 listed, so this is a listing which requires for the owner to keep that particular property up to a certain standard, to maintain the history and the integrity of the building. Is there a view taken by the planners as to whether, so if someone is suggesting that they could make a bit more income by using the land in a way such as glamping, does having grade 2 on there hinder that more or make it better? So, for example, it might hinder it because someone would say, but this is a historical building and it shouldn't have this kind of business around it. Or it may help it in as much as the planner may say, well, for you to be able to maintain that grade 2 listed building, you're going to have to spend more money on it. So we support your development of a business which will generate more money for that use.
Yeah, well, I think you've actually described it very well there, Sarah. And it can depend. It depends, I think, a lot on the design and the sensitivity of the proposed project. So if somebody wants to put up 20 yurts around a grade 2 listed cottage, then that would clearly be seen to be inappropriate. But if somebody's got a I was looking at a linhay only yesterday, or shippen, which is a new word on me, SHIPPEN. Check it out.
Yeah, I will.
Which is a beautiful old open-fronted barn, formerly thatched, and it's in slightly poor condition. But it's next door to some equally medieval, beautiful cottages and houses, and it's within the curtilage of a Grade 2 listed property. And my gut feeling is that the planners will support an application on the conversion of that for holiday accommodations. And I've strongly suggested to the client that he makes it kind of as quirky and as glampy as he might. I think he'll be able to charge a premium for it rather than going for a more traditional cottage thing. So, and I think the planners are more likely to support that than a number of other uses. So yeah, if there's renovation of a listed building involved, or part renovation, and I have another client up the road who we got planning permission for them for 6 yurts, and they converted their barn to welfare units, to the welfare site. So there's kind of a separate kitchen for each one of the yurts in the barn, and communal toilets and that kind of stuff. So the whole kind of welfare suite is within that barn. And again, the planners quite like the scheme. Interestingly, I was told that a neighbour had tried to put in planning application for something which I haven't looked at. I don't know who did it, and I'm not naming names, but they were turned down flat. So it really does depend on the approach of design, the sensitivity of the whole thing, and getting the planners on board. And the other one I would mention about getting on board actually is your local council. Involve them at an early stage and get their support, and the neighbours will have an opinion. Ask them their opinion. Recite your units accordingly. Offer screening and sound deadening facilities, so you don't have accommodation on the top of a hill, but maybe you have it just under the brow of the hill, so it can't be seen from neighbouring properties. So that kind of stuff.
I suppose the more you consider people who might be impacted by your planning application and resulting business, the more people will be on your side and will support what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. There's always going to be a professional complainer, if you like.
Yeah.
But most people can be supportive if approached properly, and I'm sure most people want to get on with their neighbours. Why you wouldn't want to upset a neighbour, so just approach it sensitively and get it right, really.
And so another question that I get asked a lot is around forest land. And this is land that doesn't have any accommodation on it, because there are pockets of this type of woodland and spruce land and that type of unusable land really in any other way, such as an agricultural way. And they suggest that if they bought that bit of land, which is more affordable, or leased it or rented it, that they would be able to then put some structures on it which were temporary. So, for example, something on wheels. So if we're talking about shepherd's huts, that is seen as more temporary because they have wheels and they can be moved, and they can be moved quite quickly if necessary. The opinion has often been that that's something that they would be able to achieve quite easily. What's your opinion on that?
It boils down to the change of use again. If you're using it as a commercial business, separate from forestry, you're going to need planning permission on it again. I'm aware of people who have had some success in forestry sites, and indeed I'm a timber person myself, as you know, Sarah, and I love tree houses. I love the hanging tree tents. I like staying in woodland and at the top of trees myself, but the planners will view it as a change of use. So effectively it's changing that use from forestry to commercial purposes. Now, a sensitive application, we mentioned the long lead thing before, might get you that permission, but there are no guarantees to to any bit of land. The nearest thing I can give anybody to a guarantee is buying some farmland with a farmhouse attached, and being a farmer, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that because they support farm diversification?
Exactly that, yes. So again, in the national planning policy framework, it clearly states that the farmers are in trouble. We've got to improve their lot and allow them to diversify, they will find it easier if they put temporary structures in place rather than permanent ones to get those permissions. So a temporary structure is a bit of in my opinion, a misnomer anyway. I mean, so you put in a shepherd's hut. Where do the people? What about the loos and things? There tends to be some kind of permanent infrastructure has to be put in place. Paths and roads, they're all subject. They're all engineering works, effectively, and they're subject to planning approval, I'm afraid.
Mm. And so, if you came across, say, a small farm with a bit of land and thought that you may diversify, but saw that there was an agricultural tie on that particular farm, how can people overcome the agricultural tie if they don't want to predominantly get involved in agriculture? And explain, maybe just for the benefit of our listeners, what an agricultural tie is briefly.
Okay, well, an agricultural tie is a property that's been designated for agricultural workers, people involved in agriculture, so farm labourers, farmers themselves, and people whose primary income is derived from some kind of agricultural enterprise. And that tie is, they're very strict. And again, I get asked quite a lot. Somebody says, oh, look, there's a fabulous property here and it's only that much. And how do we get rid of the agricultural tie bit? Because I'm not a farmer. And the simple answer is it's very difficult to get rid of that tie. If a property has the agricultural tie designation on it, and you want to take that away, it has to have been demonstrated to have been for sale for, I think it's something in the region of 10 years to get rid of that tie. And you have to demonstrate that your income is from agriculture. It can include retirees from agriculture, and people whose intention is to work in agriculture, so they've got a job, and then they buy the property, and maybe that job falls through or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting because many people are attracted by that because properties with an agricultural tie on it are much cheaper. We're talking
Sure.
tens of thousands cheaper than those without an agricultural tie. So that
Sure.
obviously people are very attracted by that because it looks like a good investment. So if someone is seeing something with an agricultural tie and they say, oh, well, if we get that and we remove the agricultural tie, we'll be able to sell it for much more money in the future.
Sure.
So effectively what you're saying is that is incredibly hard to do.
It's very, very hard to do. And I would have done it myself years ago had it been easy.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There are many of us that would have. And so not only that, but if you buy something with the idea that you're not actually in agriculture and you're not going to be predominantly making money from an agricultural business, and yet you buy something with an agricultural tie, what happens then? Can the council force you to sell to get out of that property?
You have to demonstrate that you're involved in agriculture before they will sell it to you.
Right. Okay.
That's the size of it.
So you have to prove your worth and your agricultural credentials before purchasing.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah. But so they, however, support very much farm diversification if you were already a farmer and wanted to diversify income, not necessarily.
Yeah, so if you are involved in agriculture and you happen to live in an agricultural type property, then there's nothing to stop you applying for a glamping site within that property. And the chances of getting approved would be quite good. Now, the other thing I would say here, of course, is that if somebody wanting to get into the glamp site operators world might approach someone with an agricultural tie who they might be struggling to pay their rent, and they might say, okay, well, would you rent me that field there? And that can be a good tie-up. So to work in partnership with somebody who is in an agricultural tie, i.e. a farm or a farm neighbour's buildings already. Obviously, that might impact on the operator's profits, and I probably suggest that any farmer with a salt is going to want a share of those profits. But I think it's certainly a valid way of looking at it, really, and it might save you buying the land in the first place, of course. If you work on a kind of points basis, then you might invest X number of pounds in bell tapes and this and that, see how it goes for a few years, and if it goes well, then you can start investing in expensive timber in tent structures, for example, such as my own. Yeah, so I think that's a quite a valid way of approaching it, and I think finding a farmer who, and there are many out there who are facing retirement and want to hold back a bit from doing the big farming thing, who would be like to be approached. Sure.
And this is something that actually, from my experience over in the USA, they do so much more than they do in the UK. In the UK, the idea or the default setting seems to be, I need to own the land, I need to own the buildings, I need to own everything.
Yeah.
Whereas actually in the USA, it's the default setting is, I can lease this, I can organise an agreement, and I can set something up subject to the permissions being achieved, which means that the commitments and the issues of maybe liability and loss isn't so prevalent, because of course if you buy a property and then you don't get planning, you're stuck with the property. Absolutely. And land. Whereas if you're leasing it, you can have an arrangement where you will only lease it subject to permissions being achieved, and therefore if your permissions aren't achieved, you can walk away with very little financial loss and a whole heap of experience, one way or the other. But so it's really interesting that you've mentioned that, because that's something that I'm talking about my clients much more now, especially as this industry gets more popular and land gets more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very valid method of doing it, and it allows people to dip their toes in as well, of course, rather than the huge expense of buying land and then maybe not getting planning permission on it, and having paid a bit more for the land than a farmer might have. It allows you to dip your toe in, really, and try it for a bit, see how it goes. And I think it's a fairly, maybe not quite unique, but a British trait that we feel we have to own the land that we sit on and stuff all the time. And you can pay an awful lot of rent for the price of a bit of land these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's just one final thing we haven't really talked about, and that's about the change of use for land and buildings, in terms of what, from your experience, is the most likely to be successful in those terms of changing the use. So is there a particular thing, if somebody was looking to buy or to lease a bit of land, and yet there was already land and buildings, or already buildings or a business operating from that land, can you offer a few examples that might be the most successful at having a change of use to glamping?
Sure. Well, clearly the most obvious one is the farmland, as we've been saying, really. But anywhere where there's a farmer with some workshops that he's letting out, for example, or then the next ones would be small holdings. They're pretty good bets where there is already accommodation on site for the owner operator. If it's a bare piece of land, I mean, it's certainly not impossible, but it is going to make your life more difficult to get permission to live on there in the first place, let alone run a business from there. Farmland is the big one, really.
So does that include something like a nursery, a plant nursery, or a garden centre or something like that?
Yeah, they're great, especially if they now have defunct buildings capable of being converted. So permitted development does allow you to convert some of those buildings, and in most areas, mostly excluding AONBs, national parks, heritage sites, you can actually get permitted. You can develop those things. You still need to fill out the forms and send it off, and do the provision of environmental assessments and structural engineers reports, all that kind of stuff. But it can be a lot easier to get that permission if it's got redundant agricultural buildings on there, which are structurally sound. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
So you've very kindly offered to share with listeners your top tips for sourcing a piece of land with the best chance of success for achieving planning consent. And I'll include links to that in the show notes so that people can go and find out more there. And I will have all of your details in there as well if people want to get in touch with you directly and speak to you about their specific projects and plans and things that they're wanting to find out more about. So is there anything else that you would like to leave people with, and specifically about you and how they might be able to contact you?
Sure. Well, I'm available through my business, which is called Timber Intent. I specialise in planning and architecture and tents and canopies. I've got a small range of what I call garden party high pass cells, which are great for glamp sites. So you can put them around campfires and things. They're all quite safe, and they can give you decent space outside for alfresco dining and stuff. So with inclement weather, they save you from the rain, and with really sunny weather, they save you from the sun. I'm always available for a chat. I don't charge for the first hour generally. If I haven't got to travel very far, I'm delighted to come out and have a look at properties, certainly in the southwest, further afield on request.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure that people will be wanting to make the most of your expertise and have a look as well at your canvas structures that you produce. I certainly love them and have seen them at various trade shows, and they look very impressive. So if you go to the show notes, as I said, so that's inspirecamping.com/011, and that will take you to everything that we've talked about today, including all the links to the various resources that you need to know. And so thank you very much, Roger. That's fantastic. Thank you for giving us your time today. That's been really helpful.
It's been a pleasure, Sarah. Always nice to talk to you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this and found it useful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Check out the show notes on inspiredcamping.com/podcast. For the links in this particular episode, you simply have to go to inspiredcamping.com/011. If you are thinking of setting up your own glamping business, then I always recommend you seek expert advice. Roger will be more than happy to help you with your planning issues. If you want to discover the shortcuts, tips and tricks to setting up your own glamping business, or if you already have one and you're looking to get more guests and bookings for your business, then all you need to do is hop on over to inspiredcourses.com, where I share my secrets for this industry. And if it's a community of like-minded business people you're looking for, then don't hesitate to head on over to Facebook and join my Glamping Business group. We'd love to see you there. Take care.